Howdy folks, welcome to another episode of Mingles with Jingles. I hope you enjoyed your weekend. Now back to work because it's Monday. That salt ain't gonna mine itself. This is what I've been up to this weekend. Heliborn. I did a video on it last week, just before it went live on Steam. It's been in early access about a year, but I have basically been playing nothing but this the whole weekend. Well, that's not strictly true. I played some Bomber Crew as well because that's a good laugh, but Heliborn has its claws into me good and proper. This is Vietnam. These are the Tier 2 aircraft. You've got all kinds of iconic aircraft going on here. You've got the Huey, you've got the Cobra, you've got the Chinook. What's basically happening is, and this is PvP as well by the way, which is not something that I showed in my previous Heliborn video. But you can see all of those various different bases on the map. You capture a base, you reinforce it with ground troops from your air assault helicopters, and then that base will spawn a column of armoured vehicles which will move up the connecting road to the next base. And they will attack and capture it unless the enemy team prevent them from doing it. And those are the basics of PvP in Heliborn. It's a simple but effective concept. It's more complicated than that. Your air assault helicopters, or any helicopter that's capable of carrying troops, instead of just infantry to reinforce the bases, you can elect to take two-man RPG teams, and you can drop them off on the roadside, ready to ambush any of those armoured columns for you. You can set up mortar teams, so that the scout helicopters can call in mortar strikes, and you can also drop off two-man surface-to-air missile teams to ambush any enemy helicopters that try to assault your bases. But it got me thinking, can you imagine how amazing this would be with tanks? I mean, it's pretty amazing with helicopters, but just think World of Tanks for a second. Just think of the possibilities. Let's say, for example, you start in the southern spawn. Now, there are multiple choices of first firebase to go for. And remember, the more tanks in a capture point, the faster the point is captured, and going with Heliborn game mechanics, the faster the armoured convoy would be generated from that firebase to move up the road to the next firebase. Or are you going to perhaps go for the long-term approach, play the long game, and say, for example, rush your light tanks to the furthest of the initial 3 firebases, your mediums to the second furthest, and your heavies to the closest one, so they all arrive at more or less the same time. So instead of just getting one firebase and its armoured column up and running as quickly as possible, and then everybody piggybacking that armoured column as it hedgehogs from one firebase to the next, you've instead got 3 separate firebases claimed right at the beginning. And it'll take you slightly longer, but you'll have 3 armoured columns moving up the map. There's a bit of dilution of effort going on there, of course, but the enemy team can't be everywhere at once. Some fascinating possibilities. Tank destroyers lying in wait on the ridge lines over unoccupied firebases, waiting for the light tanks to come rushing in, trying to sneak early captures. It just, the mind boggles. I mean, Heliborn's amazing, but I couldn't help thinking, what would this be like with tanks? And it doesn't just have to be for PvP either. When I went to Wargaming's headquarters in Cyprus and I spoke to Victor Kisley, oh, congratulations Victor, by the way, he's a billionaire now, he's worth over $1 billion. He did mention that they were looking at some kind of co-op battle mode for World of Tanks. Now this was well over a year ago, and we've seen operations, and they're very, very popular in World of Warships, where it's cooperative against the AI in the different scenarios. Nothing like that's appeared in World of Tanks yet, however. Wargaming, if I might make a suggestion, look at this! Here is your co-op battle template for World of Tanks. Cooperative battles in Heliborn are exactly the same. The only difference is there's no enemy players on the enemy team. The AI does exactly the same thing that you're doing. It will spawn armoured columns which will move from one firebase to the next, and then from that firebase to the next, unless you get up there and stop them. You could do exactly the same thing, but in World of Tanks. I think it would be amazing. Straw poll. How many of you, if you could do this, but in tanks, would be up for it? I imagine it would be very, very popular. I know there are plenty of people who have been begging for a co-op battle mode in World of Tanks. And I know that it is something that Wargaming want to do, but the problem is if you were to take your standard battle in World of Tanks and then try to make bots that are capable of the same kind of reactions and the same tactics and behaviours as players, that's a hell of a lot of investment in artificial intelligence research. But you don't have to. They don't have to be that smart. World of Warships, actually the bots in World of Warships are pretty intelligent. We're going to come on to World of Warships and scenarios and operations again in a moment, but the bots in World of Warships, it's easier to make them smart than bots in World of Tanks. Because warships don't have to worry about terrain. They don't have to worry so much about line of sight and visibility. I mean, they do, but they don't have to worry about it to nearly the same degree as a tank would. So it's easier to code a good bot in World of Warships than it would be to code a good bot in World of Tanks. But if the AI bots are just armoured columns moving from one firebase to the next, occupying it, strengthening it, and then progressing from that firebase to the next, the code doesn't have to be that complicated. It should be quite easily doable. I mean, I don't know the first thing about AI programming, but it doesn't seem like it would be that hard. And I would definitely play that. I think it would be amazing fun. Serious question, and this doesn't just apply to World of Tanks players. This also applies to people who have never played World of Tanks. And perhaps most importantly, it also applies to people who used to play World of Tanks and have uninstalled it. If Wargaming were to announce that next week they were introducing a brand new cooperative battle mode, and it was basically this, or some variation of this, but with tanks instead of helicopters, how many of you would play, and in some cases, reinstall and play it? I'm genuinely curious to know, because I think this has some fantastic potential. I've been absolutely kicking the arse out of this in Heliborn the entire weekend. I mean, I must have done 20 hours. It's just, I have not been able to put this game down. I've even played PvP. I'm completely terrible at it, but it's fun. Anyway, I said we were going to talk a little bit about World of Warships and scenarios and operations in that. Because I was thinking, I mean, the scenarios in World of Warships operations, they're pretty good. I do enjoy playing them, some more than others. And at the moment it's the Halloween operation, which at this precise moment is a repeat of last year's Halloween event, which was fun. But on the 26th, they're giving us what comes next after the current Halloween event. Once you get the good ship Transylvania through the portal after sinking the battleship Rasputin, what happens on the other side? Well, I haven't played it yet. I didn't go onto the test server, but I've seen videos. Flamu in particular did a fantastic video guide on the new Halloween event, and it just looks incredible. And I have to say, I am overall very, very impressed with the work that they have been doing in co-op battle operations in World of Warships. But I wish they could do a little more, particularly when it comes to historical scenarios, like the Dunkirk operation that they did. And the one that I always think of whenever I think of potential historical scenarios for World of Warships is the Battle off Samar. I've actually talked about this in a previous episode of Mingles with Jingles, where I went into some detail about the extraordinary acts of heroism that occurred on that day. But for those of you who still have no idea what I'm talking about, what basically happened was the Japanese had been trying to get a decisive naval battle in the Pacific. Once it became apparent that they were probably going to lose, they wanted to draw the US Navy into a big fight where they could inflict enough casualties on the US fleet that they would be able to bring America to the negotiating table and get concessions. Negotiate a conditional peace. And they very, very nearly pulled it off. They organised a fleet and split it into 3 groups. All of their remaining carriers were part of the decoy group, because America didn't realise it at the time. Japan still had some very powerful fleet carriers, but they didn't have any aircraft for them, and they didn't have any pilots to fly those aircraft. So they set their carriers up as a big decoy, sort of, yoo-hoo, here I am, come after me, for the US fleet under Admiral Halsey, and Halsey fell for the bait. He went rushing off after the Japanese carriers. To be fair to Halsey, the Americans didn't know how bad a state the Japanese carriers and Japanese naval aviation was in. They just assumed that they were still a very, very potent threat. But Halsey fell for the bait. He took all of his fast battleships, he took all of his fleet carriers, and they went chasing off after these Japanese carriers. Japanese carriers were never anything more than a diversion. They were considered completely expendable. Their only job was to draw away the American fast battleships and fleet carriers, and they did that job. But there were two other surface action groups. One of them, the smaller of the two other surface groups, consisted of the battleships Yamashiro and Fuso, the heavy cruiser Megami, and 4 destroyers. This force was ambushed and slaughtered during a night action known as the Battle of Suragawa Strait. They were ripped apart primarily by Rear Admiral Jesse Oldendorf's old pre-World War II battle wagons. These were battleships that had been upgraded and modernised since the Second World War broke out. These were the battleships that were lying in Pearl Harbor when the Japanese attacked. They'd since been modernised, but they were never going to replace the power plants of these ships, so they were slow and they guzzled fuel, and they were never going to be able to keep up with fast fleet carriers and fast battleships, so they'd been left behind, and they did a fantastic job decimating this Japanese battleship force. But there was a second Japanese battleship force that made it through undetected, and the following morning the third Japanese surface action group fell upon the almost completely undefended escort carriers of Task Force 3. Task Force 3 consisted of half a dozen escort carriers. Now, before you get too carried away thinking, oh well, they're aircraft carriers. An escort carrier? Technically it's an aircraft carrier, but these things were tiny. William Kaiser's shipyards were churning one of these things out every week. They were only big enough to carry one composite squadron. They were cheap, they were cheerful, but they got the job done. And the escort carriers' mission that day was to provide close air support for the Marines ashore in the Philippines. That was their job. And their only defence was a tiny screen of Fletcher-class destroyers and destroyer escorts. What's a destroyer escort? Destroyer escort's the American name for what the Royal Navy calls a frigate. So, like a destroyer, but not as good. Right. So, when this second Japanese battleship group appeared off the horizon, and half a dozen destroyers and destroyer escorts were the only thing that stood between the escort carriers of Task Force 3 and the Marines ashore on the Philippines, and total annihilation, they shit their pants. But only for a second. And then they attacked. Well, the destroyers and destroyer escorts did. The escort carriers made steam and took really big steps in the other direction while throwing every aircraft they had at the Japanese battleship force. We haven't actually discussed what this Japanese battleship force consisted of yet, have we? Are you ready for this? The lead ship of the Japanese battleship force was the Yamato. The Yamato alone displaced more tonnage than every ship in Task Force 3 combined. And it wasn't just the Yamato. The Yamato was accompanied by the battleship Nagato and the two Kongo-class battleships Kongo and Haruna, the heavy cruisers Chokai, Haguro, Kumano, Suzuya, Chikuma and Tone, the two light cruisers, the Yahagi and Noshiro, and 11 Kagero, Yugamo and Shimakaze class destroyers. So that's 4 battleships, including the Yamato, 6 heavy cruisers, 2 light cruisers and 11 destroyers. And the Americans had 6 escort carriers, 3 destroyers and 4 destroyer escorts. And the Americans attacked. And the Japanese weren't expecting that. They weren't expecting that at all. And they consistently kept misidentifying the forces that were attacking them. They identified the escort carriers as fleet carriers, big ships like the Midway and the Enterprise. They identified the destroyers, the Fletchers, as cruisers. And they just couldn't contemplate that a force of destroyers and destroyer escorts, and there were only 3 destroyers and 4 destroyer escorts, would attack the Yamato, the Nagato, the Kong. You get the idea. It was suicidal. So they were convinced that just over the horizon there must be a much, much bigger American force. And they were misidentifying the destroyers that were attacking them as cruisers in the first place. So the Japanese always thought that they were up against a much bigger force than they actually were. And so the Japanese commander, after getting several of his ships torpedoed by these suicidal, just unbelievably courageous American destroyer and destroyer escort captains, turned his fleet around and ran away. And the Americans won the battle. It should never have happened, but it was just unbelievable. They called it the Miracle off Samar. Now imagine this in World of Warships. This is what I want to see as a new operation in World of Warships. They've done something similar with the Dunkirk operation, so they can do it. Give everyone a Fletcher-class destroyer just for the purposes of this operation, and the objective is to have at least 4 of your 6 escort carriers retreat from the battle area alive. And you have to fight the Yamato, the Nagato, the Kongo, the Hiruna, 7 Japanese heavy cruisers, and 11 Japanese destroyers. It would be amazing. For that matter, you could also do the Battle of the Surigao Strait, except do it from the Japanese perspective, where you've got a force. You can pick battleships, cruisers, destroyers, whatever you want, because that's what the Japanese had. And you have to sail up the Surigao Strait against Jesse Oldendorf's battleships. And they're basically crossing your T at the far end of the strait, while you're coming under torpedo attack from destroyers and harassing fire from cruisers. That would make a pretty amazing battle as well. There's all sorts of things you can do. And I'm kind of disappointed. Aside from Dunkirk, of course, there's the new Halloween event as well, which is looking pretty impressive. But I want to see historical stuff, because I'm a history nerd. History is cool, kids. How many of you would be interested in playing those kind of operations in World of Warships as well? Something that actually happened that you could recreate in World of Warships, like the Dunkirk operation that they did, which was very, very good. So, we know they can do it. They just haven't done it yet. Well, they have, but they haven't done it since Dunkirk. Come on, Wargaming, more of the same, please. There's all kinds of things you could do. I've just given you 2 examples. Anyway, a couple of announcements to make, and while we've still got Heliborn running in the background, I got an email from the Heliborn developers last week. They were delighted with the response to my Heliborn video, and they've decided to put me in the game. Some of you are already aware of this. I've been getting messages from everybody saying, Jingles, you're in Heliborn. Yes, I know. What they've done is they've created a Mighty Jingles skin for the UH-1D, the Huey Delta, and it looks like this. Check that bad boy out. I've made it into another game. That's 3 now. My parents must be so proud of me. So how can you get this in Heliborn? Well, you don't have to do anything special. Like the other aircraft skins in the game that aren't part of downloadable content, you just grind experience and unlock it with experience. So anybody can have that as a skin for their Huey Delta in Heliborn. Featuring the Mighty Jingles Howdy Folks roundel on the tail boom, designed by our very own Sammy Hallam. Which brings us on to the second announcement that I wanted to make in this week's episode of Mingles with Jingles. Our t-shirt shop, it doesn't just sell t-shirts, there are mugs and stickers and stuff as well, but our t-shirt shop is finally open for business. I've gotten together with Sammy Hallam because I just love his artwork. He's also done artwork for the Tank Museum's David Fletcher Tank Chats t-shirts, which I am a proud owner of a copy. And we've gotten some t-shirt designs together. Now, I leaked the news of the t-shirt shop during one of my live streams last week, and a bunch of them have already gone on sale. But one thing that did become apparent was that the sizes available... Oh, I need to be really careful how I say this. The t-shirts were available in sizes going up to 3XL, triple XL size. But apparently there are some rather large individuals working in the salt mines, and triple XL wasn't really going to cut it for them. So what we've done, by the time you see this episode of Mingles with Jingles, we've gotten in touch with Teespring, and they are now available in sizes going up to 5XL. And if you need something bigger than that, you'll need to see a tent maker. Right? 5XL is as big as they go. But they are now on sale. We've tried to keep the quality up and the price down. Speaking of the price, without going into exact details, I basically haven't done anything as far as this t-shirt design and the whole storefront is concerned. Sammy has done all of the work. He didn't just do the artwork, he got in touch with Teespring, he set up the shop, he's done everything. All I've done is said, yeah, sounds like a good idea, go ahead and do it. So bearing that in mind, I thought it was only fair that Sammy received the overwhelming majority of any profits generated from the sales of these t-shirts. So do the right thing, support a struggling artist. Buy yourself a t-shirt today. It's all for a good cause. Seriously, Sammy, thank you very much for all the hard work you put in, and I hope you make some money out of this. Anyway, that's it for this week's episode of Mingles with Jingles. I hope you enjoyed it, and I really need to get this video put to bed so I can log back onto Heliborn and have a go with the Apache gunship that I've just unlocked. I can't wait. I hope it doesn't suck. Because that's always the case, isn't it, when you're looking forward to something. It was like that with the Tiger in World of Tanks. It was like, yay, made it to tier 7, I've got the Tiger. The stock Tiger sucks so much. I mean, it's such a bad tank. It's great fully upgraded, but stock, yeah, not so much. Anyway, wish me luck. Take care, and I'll catch you next time. See you, folks. Have a good one.